What's happening, everybody? Welcome back. And if it's your first time here, just plain welcome. The 2016, 2020, and 2024 elections were all framed as somehow about preserving democracy. Donald Trump was such an existential threat to a free society that it was imperative he be defeated. Of course, that only worked 1 out of 3 times, and there's questions about the one time it supposedly worked. But did they have a point? Well, not really, because absolute bombshell got dropped that shows that, at least with Joe Biden, this was a major case of projection. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard unveiled something a couple of days ago that is, let me get the actual wording correct because I don't want to get it wrong here, the Strategic Implementation Plan for Countering Domestic Terrorism. Now, that shouldn't sound overly troubling by itself because countering domestic terrorism is something the government has a vested interest in doing. But where the problem comes in is what is actually in this report, which is available for people to read, especially when you compare it to things that the Biden administration did. It involved 2 aspects. The first was largely gun control focused. It revolved around things like making it more difficult for law-abiding citizens to access firearms and to be able to take firearms from people via red flag laws, which circumvent due process. Yeah, you go to a judge, but you don't get a day in court until well after your guns are taken. This has been a very big part of gun control efforts for quite some time, and the Biden administration was knee-deep in it. But now this wasn't overly surprising by itself because Biden's been a gun control advocate for years. He was one of the powers behind the 1994 assault weapon ban. The idea of him trying to restrict guns didn't send up any red flags in and of itself. But there's something else that we know about that happened, and that is the Twitter files. Now, some of you may remember that after Elon Musk bought Twitter, he started going through records and archives. He brought in some journalists, and he let them run wild. And what we found was very high-level connections between people at Twitter and people in the Biden administration. And what would happen was the Biden administration would simply ask Twitter, hey, this is a problem. Shadow ban this account. Delete this message. Silence this story. This is misinformation. And Twitter complied. Now, whether it was we need to do this because we agree with the administration or we need to do this because, God forbid, they regulate us, is kind of irrelevant. It was still government silencing the American people on a social media platform at their direction. And we have since learned that this was happening at Facebook as well. We don't know where else it may have been happening, but it's safe to say with those 2, you've probably covered most of the bases. They probably didn't pay much attention to MySpace because nobody pays attention to MySpace anymore. I don't even know how to get into my MySpace. Anyway, so what we had was a 2-prong approach that involved restricting guns and restricting speech. How is that preserving democracy? Now, let's understand, if you want to create a tyrannical system, if you want absolute control, there are 2 things you have to control. 1, you have to eliminate the people's means to fight back. Gun control has to be in place before you can do anything else because otherwise you have no control after you start restricting other rights. Okay? It doesn't even matter how many guns they have. Just a handful can cause a problem. You have to make it so difficult for anyone to have a firearm that nobody who would oppose you can have that. The elites will always have access, but that's why they like things like, making sure that authorities can decide who and who can't have guns through a permitting process or through a concealed carry permit. Why they want to restrict the kind of guns that might be useful in a fight, right? Look at Colorado's recent law where you've got to go through all kinds of hoops just to get access to a detachable magazine-fed semi-automatic weapon, which includes most semi-automatic handguns. Now, once you've done that, you can start to curtail speech. And that becomes also important because if you can control the narrative, if you can control what information people have, you kind of control how they think. They might interpret things differently, but you still have a lot of control over what they can interpret. And if you undermine what people understand, what they know to be true with false narratives, you make it a lot easier to control them. For example, the 1619 Project from the New York Times was all about pretending that the entire United States was built on a foundation of slavery, which is weird because a lot of states didn't really have slavery for very long. Slavery was something that a lot of states wanted gone before we were ever a country. And the rest of the states should have. Okay? Include. But the idea was to undermine this idea of America as a land of the free. Because once you understand that in the way they want you to understand it, it becomes a lot easier to accept restrictions, particularly on the majority, to the benefit of the minority. Likewise, going after things that were conspiracy theories at the time, things that we now know to actually be true, such as the COVID lab leak theory, the fact that there was no scientific basis for social distancing or masking or any of that stuff. All of that really kind of, was about directing the narrative, about controlling what people say and think. Now, Biden's goals may have been whatever they were, right? I don't even know that he knows what his goals were at this point. What we do know is that this is what the Biden administration was doing. This is what they were doing, and they were calling it a way to combat domestic terrorism. But none of this was applied to the left. Keep in mind that 2020, we saw violence all over the country. Almost every major city burned to some degree or another over what cops in Minneapolis did. Right? And at the time, people weren't excusing what happened. And it still burned. And we were told that COVID, the most dangerous pandemic we had ever seen, that needed to shut down our economy, our educational systems, our families, that separated people from being able to say goodbye to their loved ones, wasn't that bad after all. Racism was worse. Nobody is saying racism is good. Nobody was saying it. And then Biden comes into office and immediately focuses on silencing the right. And January 6th was not the right's shining moment of glory by any stretch of the imagination. And it was enough of an impetus where Democrats could try to justify it. See, January 6th, insurrection. All the proof they needed that we were this massive threat. And then what? Well, we had Luigi Mangione allegedly shoot Brian Thompson in the back of the head with a 3D printed firearm with a 3D printed suppressor. And the left is freaking swooning over him. We've got Democrats praising freaking MS-13 members and screaming about how they were treated so unfairly by being sent to their home country when they were here illegally. And yes, that was all determined in court. There was just an order that he couldn't be sent back to El Salvador. And the Trump administration admittedly screwed up by doing so. They could have sent him anywhere else, but they didn't. And now we've got the whole Austin Metcalf thing where a black kid kills a white kid. Race didn't seem to play a factor. All the police reports, the evidence, everything seems to back up that this kid did kill Austin Metcalf for nothing. Right? There was no threat to his life. He claims it was self-defense. It wasn't. That does not meet the standard of self-defense, even understand your ground laws. And they've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for this little shithead. All right, so my point here is that the left has been celebrating violence for a long time. The right had one bad day. And somehow that makes it okay to focus on them, because it wasn't any leftist conspiracy theories being silenced by the Biden administration. It wasn't any whack job calls for violence by the left that were being silenced by the Biden administration. Right? It's still going on. There was a piece on Substack asking, when do we kill them, earlier today, or yesterday, excuse me. This is considered acceptable. This idea of visiting violence upon the right is considered noble and acceptable from the left, and the right has one bad day and now everyone's a domestic terrorist. Yeah, sorry. This is why I don't trust government to have any power, like, at all. I mean, I even the powers they're supposed to have in the Constitution, I'm leery about because of shit like this. They will engage in mission creep to such a degree that we get right back where we are. That's just where we're at. But that's what I think. I want to know what you think. Go down in the comments below and tell me what's on your mind about this topic. Am I on point? Am I off base? Which is it? I really want to hear. While you're down there, do me a favor. Hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell. That way you can be alerted when I have content coming out 3 times a week, every week. If you want to support the channel beyond that, and I sincerely hope that you do, there is a Ko-fi link down below. Let you kick in a couple of bucks. It lets me justify spending the time to create videos and put them up here at YouTube. That way my wife thinks I'm actually doing something useful. But on that note, I'm going to wrap it up, and I will see you all in the next video.